Welcome to MOAA's special webinar on military housing policies and initiatives. I'm Brian Anderson, MOAA's Senior Director for Career Transition Services, and we are excited to host this event. But first, a few administrative announcements. If you're having audio difficulties, please check your settings and ensure your sound is turned up. If you're still experiencing challenges after doing that, you may need to log out and then back onto the platform to reset your settings. Our number one question is always, can I have a recording? And the answer is yes. Everyone who registered will receive an email later in the week with a link to the recorded session, which is good for 30 days. To help navigate the platform and make this evening as interactive as possible, please note the circled buttons. When you click on them, you are simply going to bring the windows up and down so you can view each and then customize your screen as desired. Here you will be able to view the guest speakers, the slide presentation, and communicate with us through the question and answer features. Now, just a little bit about Military Officers Association of America. We are an advocacy association comprised of 350,000 members from the 8 uniformed services. And our charter is to advocate for military pay, compensation, and benefits for those currently serving and veterans, their family members, and surviving spouses. And this is what we are fighting for.
Every officer has 2 families, the ones they're fighting with and the ones they're fighting for. The Military Officers Association of America is busy behind the lines on behalf of both, advocating for everything from better housing to more spouse support programs, because it's nice to have someone on your side when you're in charge of a family, let alone 2 of them.
In addition, MOAA has established 2 charitable subsidiaries, the MOAA Scholarship Fund and the MOAA Foundation, to help military and veteran families enjoy a quality of life they've earned through their years of service. Please consider donating today. It's just one more way each of us can emulate MOAA's motto of never stop serving. Also, I would like to pass special thanks to Delta Dental for supporting this and our other MOAA virtual events. Along with our advocacy efforts and our MOAA charities, we provide programs for the uniformed services and veteran community, plus exclusive products and services for our membership. You can find more on the advantage of MOAA membership at the website link. Now, let's get on with the main event so that you can learn more about the policies and initiatives to ensure military families have access to safe and affordable housing options on and off the base and installation. It is my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Goodale, MOAA's Director for Military Family Policy and Spouse Programs. So Jen, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Brian already shared my title, so I'll just give you a little background. I am a former Marine, and I married a Marine. So for the last 19 years, I've been associated with the Marine Corps in some way, shape, or form. I'm really excited to talk to these powerhouses that we've got on our panel today, and I don't want to delay it anymore, so I'm going to pass it over to Deputy Secretary of Defense for Housing, Pat Corey.
Thank you, Jen. And thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to be here today. As she indicated, I am the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Housing. It's a fairly newly established position in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, established in October of last year. And so my office reports to the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. And my responsibilities primarily are to support the department's chief housing officer, who is designated by the Secretary of Defense, to support that individual in performing the statutorily defined duties of the chief housing officer. They're defined in law in the FY20 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, and then they were expanded to not just include privatized housing oversight, but to include all of the Department of Defense housing programs, government-owned and leased housing. They were expanded in the FY21 NDAA. So my portfolio includes all of the Department of Defense housing programs, government-owned, leased, family housing, unaccompanied housing, and that, of course, includes also the privatized housing program, which includes family and unaccompanied housing and privatized lodging. And so I look forward to the opportunity to be on this panel today. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. I don't know how you sleep with all of those responsibilities. Okay, next I'd like to Major Michael Archer, U.S. Marine Corps retired, to introduce himself.
Good evening, and I too am very happy to be in this panel discussion. As you mentioned, I'm a retired Marine Judge Advocate, which means that I've been dealing with these sorts of issues both on active duty and then in my civilian position, which I've had since 2004 as the Legal Assistance Director for Marine Corps Installations East, an area whose principal tenant is Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and essentially takes up the southeast region of the United States. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Michael. We look forward to you sharing your information on the Service Member Civil Relief Act, because we know you've got a lot of experience with that. Now we'll pass it over to Shannon Razanen, President and Executive Director of the Military Family Advisory Network. And I'm sorry if I butchered your last name.
No, you were perfect, and that never happens. So thank you, Jen and MOAA. Thanks so much for having me this evening. I'm Shannon with Military Family Advisory Network, also known as MFAN for short. What we do is work with military families and conduct research to really understand the challenges that military families are facing and build collaborative solutions. We started looking at housing back in 2018 and then fielded a survey in 2019 that was really insightful as we advised and supported in making sure that families' lived experiences were heard. So nearly 17,000 families responded in 1 week, and it really gave us some good information as we look to what families are experiencing in their homes. So excited to be here. Thank you for having me, and look forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks for joining us. And finally, Brad Collier, Public-Private Ventures Program Manager.
Hi, good evening. As it states, I am the Public-Private Ventures Program Manager. I am also the Housing Director for the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy Installations and Environment. And in that role, I work closely with Pat Corey as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Housing to make sure that Department of Defense policies are then promulgated throughout both the Navy and the Marine Corps. So I primarily work as a policy role to make sure that we are providing the proper guidance and policies so that the folks out in the field can provide the quality housing that our sailors and our Marines deserve. I just want to say thank you for allowing me to participate in the panel and look forward to a lively discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Again, thank you all for being here. And just before we kick off the first question, Brian, if you'll throw up our first poll, we just want to see where people are tuning in from. And while we have you guys answer that, I will go ahead and talk about the first question. So it's been more than a year since spouses testified before lawmakers about mold, rodents, and other situations aboard military installations in the family housing. And they had a lot of frustration in dealing with landlords and the military in order to get it fixed. It seems like the answer was the Tenant Bill of Rights, which is a great way to go forward. And of the 18 rights, I believe 14 are currently in place, with leaving 4 left to enforce. Ms. Corey, would you please give us some insight into the creation of the specific rights and how they protect military families living aboard those installations?
Sure. Thank you. So let me first say that the Department of Defense really has made significant progress taking actions overall to enhance the Military Housing Privatization Initiative program over the past year and a half or so. And we recognize that the Military Housing Privatization Initiative, MHPI, Tenant Bill of Rights, is a really important part of our effort to rebuild trust with military families. So as we tried to address the various reform requirements in the FY20 NDAA and 21 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Acts, we prioritized those efforts and initially really have focused on implementing the Tenant Bill of Rights. We actually initially started developing that Bill of Rights before the FY20 NDAA. Some of you on this panel or online may remember that we issued a survey asking military families to provide input to help us develop that Bill of Rights. And we were really far along on that when Congress decided to help us and actually gave us some specific language that they wanted us to use. And a lot of it was very similar. We had shared our draft with them. So parts of it were very similar to what we already had planned to try to put in place, but they did have some specific language and requirements that they wanted included. And so as you noted, Jen, we issued initially a Bill of Rights in February of 2020, and it did not include all of the rights. It included 15 of those rights because we realized some of them required the privatized housing companies that own the projects to voluntarily agree to actually provide those rights at their existing privatized housing projects. Even Congress recognized that and put language into the NDAA that said, go seek their voluntary agreement, because the Department of Defense and Congress, neither one can just arbitrarily go in and change an existing legal agreement. And these aren't contracts that we have. They are very complex private partnerships that are in real estate transaction documents. And so we did start working with our privatized housing project companies, and we've made a lot of progress. And actually, I'm pleased to tell you that we've actually provided Congress fairly recently a revised MHPI Tenant Bill of Rights to update the one that we issued in February. And that revision, which we will release as soon as we get past the congressional review period, that revision will include all 18 rights. So I can talk more about where we are on that, but in terms of progress, we have made significant progress. So I don't know if you want to ask more questions now, or you want me to dive in more deeply on where we are on implementation.
Well, I'd love it if you dive in more deeply. My follow-on question was the big ticket items, the withholding of the rent. That's a huge one in the 7-year maintenance history, the universal lease language.
Right. So all 18 rights, we issued policy to make those such that they could be implemented at all of the existing and any new MHPI projects.
All of that stuff is great. Please go on.
I'm sorry, you cut out on my end, so I'm sorry if I was talking over you. So because of our collaboration and the military department's collaborations with the privatized housing companies, we've really gone a long ways towards advancing the entire 18 Bill of Rights. And with very few exceptions, all the MHPI project companies have agreed to implement them. Today, at least 85% of our housing privatization projects actually already provide all 18 rights, including 7-year maintenance, the rent segregation, dispute resolution, those things that were lagging from the original Bill of Rights. So about 84%, maybe more than that, 85% or so are actually already providing that. And then of the rights, the last right is actually standard documentation, meaning the right for tenants that, to the maximum extent possible, the department to try to have consistent standardized documentation and processes for members. As a part of that, we've kind of talked a lot about a universal lease. And so we did issue a universal lease template. We issued it quite earlier this year. That took a lot of work. It requires an ability to address these rights across multiple companies that all had their own version of a tenant lease. And now that is being implemented. And so 35% of our installations already are using this new universal lease template, And again, with very few exceptions, this will be available at all of the projects soon, all of the installations soon. The holdup is primarily because each lease has to have state-specific requirements that are required by state and local tenant laws. And so working through the state addendums is a requirement that the project companies have, and then they have to come back to the military departments and get their approval of them. But we expect that with very few exceptions, that all 18 rights will be available, including that universal lease as part of the 18th right. All of those will be available by the end of the fiscal year, by the end of September 2021. So we are very pleased with the progress that we've made, and we'll certainly keep trying to work with the few project companies where there's an issue where they're not able to maybe at this point provide all 18 rights. And I'll give an example without naming the company. Of a company that does a great job, but the universal lease itself, we have the state addendums, like an appendix to the lease to address state requirements. The state that project company is in does not acknowledge addendums when they're part of a lease. So if it ever had something go to court, the things in the addendum wouldn't count. So they can't really use a lease that has addendums. So they have to do something similar that has those things brought forward into the main lease. So it's still, the parts are there, they're just not exactly the same format. And so again, that project's still providing 7-year maintenance and dispute resolution and rent segregation according to our processes, but it won't quite use that exact standard form. So that's an example and where we are.
That's really good information. Thank you so much. Brad, would you elaborate more on your personal interactions with the privatized companies that are working on the Navy and Marine Corps side of the house and how they've gone through the process? What did you get pushback from them? I mean, if you're not able to share that, I understand, but just a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, certainly. As Pat mentioned, the universal lease was quite a task. You have several partners across most of the states. And they have leases that have all been vetted through their legal counsels. We have to deal with legal counsels in the government. They have to deal with their legal counsel. So working through all that, it did take a lot of time. But I think what we finally came up with is a great document. So I think that was probably the heaviest lift in implementing these last four rights. The dispute resolution and the rent withhold. Most of that discussion focused on just the process. I wouldn't encourage folks to go read the FY20 NDA unless you're looking for some light reading to put you to sleep. But there's quite the number of requirements that we had to implement on both the military side and on the partner side to make sure everybody understood. If a family member has if a resident has an issue, where do they go to first and where do they go to second? And there are timelines and making sure that we're not putting something in place where we're setting the landlords, the military departments, the military housing office, or the resident up for failure. We wanted those to be successful. So we wanted to make sure we had a solid process before. So it really was, there wasn't so much pushback in that, we're not doing this. It was, let's see how we can get to where we need to be in implementing all these things in a successful way so that we are successful, because we don't want to roll something out and then the residents, or think they're getting a right or think they're, they have some ability for recourse and we don't have the processes set up because we haven't gone through that. So that's what really took the amount of time. I'm pleased to say that the Department of Navy at all of our installations, all of our project companies are providing all 18 tenant bill of rights. We do continue to work through the universal lease with the state addendums to make sure that they're compliant with local and state laws. So that process continues and that will get rolled out. But as far as the common documents, we use common move-in, move-out. We use common change of occupancy maintenance checklists. The dispute resolution process and the rent withhold, they have all been implemented. I'm hesitant to say that it will be 100% successful at all locations. I am sure there will be stumbles as we go through. This is a new process. We have pushed out the process to the military housing offices. They are continuing to work through that. We have very few. As far as I know, to date, since we've rolled it out, we haven't had any actual residents that you have used the formal dispute resolution process. So I am sure as we go through that, we will find areas where we need to improve the process, tweak it so that it is more user friendly, or is a better tool for our residents to resolve any disputes. But the 7-year maintenance history, that's available to all of our residents, both current residents and all incoming residents, that they can get that available. We also have advocates that we have hired at all of our military housing locations. So we do have an advocate that advocates for the military family. I would like to mention, from a military housing aspect, the Tenant Bill of Rights is for the military families that live in privatized housing. So they get all 18 rights. But as we mentioned, the majority of our sailors and Marines live out in town. So they may or may not be afforded these rights by their landlord. But regardless, the advocate at the military housing office, that advocate is for all of our service members. So anyone that comes in with a problem, whether it's with the privatized partner, with the landlord out in town, or some other housing issue, they are there to advocate for that individual. So I would encourage folks that have any type of a housing issue, seek out your advocate at your military housing office, because they are there to provide you with the support.
Thanks, Brad. That I didn't know that. And again, I've been around this game for 19 years and literally didn't know the housing office was for all of us. So that's really good to know. Shannon, as the executive director of MFAN, I'm sure you hear from a number of military families, and oftentimes it's only about the negative things and maybe not so much the positive things. Would you share some of those negative things that you're hearing related to housing?
Yeah, and I don't want to start with a negative. I really want to start with, frankly, congratulations, because this has been a massive effort, and we recognize that. The Tenant Bill of Rights, the universal lease, and we've learned a lot about this, but nowhere near as much as I know other folks on this panel have about the complexities and the innards of all these contracts and everything that goes into it. And so it's really been a Herculean effort to get to the point where we are today. And so I want to congratulate first and foremost the folks on the phone, because what's happened within the Pentagon and within the service chief level and at each of the services has been remarkable. Of course, we still hear challenges. This is not an issue that's going to be fixed overnight, right? And there's also inconsistencies at specific installations. But one thing that we now have is we have the opportunity for transparency, for clarity, for recourse in a clear, defined way that I really hope military families take advantage of, because this will allow us to get to solutions in a way that will work to everyone's benefit, so that it supports the long-term sustainability of housing for those who are serving now and for those who will follow. I live up in Newport, Rhode Island, and one of the questions that I would love to talk about later is what happens if there's not enough military housing for folks. But we're seeing a demand. People are choosing to live on base. People are choosing, especially with this really complex rental market and just housing market period right now, people are opting to live on base, and there are community elements that you just really can't replicate off post. And so I think there's been a lot of progress. Of course, there's still ways to go. I think that there's an opportunity for more education, both for military families, but then also for local commands, so that they understand how they can support those within their commands related to how to utilize the Tenant Bill of Rights, how to work with the housing office and things like that. But those things will happen over time. So I know that some of these provisions were just put in place a couple of months ago related to the tenant dispute resolution process, but I really do hope that people take advantage of that, because that's what we asked for, right? When this all kind of came to a head back in 2019, we asked for this clarity. We asked for, these systems be put in place, and they have been. It's now we have to use them. And so, I think that onus is on military families. Of course, there's still a ways to go in some locations, but we're moving the right direction.
I love the positive spin you took on that. And Pat, I have a question for you, but audience members, if you wouldn't mind filling out how satisfied you are with your current housing situation while I get my question out. We would be grateful for that. So we know that you've got your housing offices, and now I know that you're hearing from everybody about that, but you've got your housing offices, and then obviously you all hear from lawmakers when you're testifying or answering their questions. So you know that there's feedback coming to them. Is there another way that DoD receives feedback from military families that are aboard the installation, much like the ICE comments that you can do if you are at the hospital or if you have a service that you don't care for? Do those housing comments get directed towards you?
So let me start first by just saying probably everybody who's lived in either privatized housing or government housing has seen one of our annual surveys that the military departments release. And this year was the first year where it was a unified DoD survey. So we updated the survey questions to standardize them across all of the military departments and all of the types of housing, whether it's privatized or government owned, to try to make sure that the questions themselves and the process was more hours and that we had a better measure of resident satisfaction. So that's a really important tool that the military departments and the services use to look, as a broad standpoint of where there are housing concerns and so forth. But Brad, I guess I'll ask you if you want to talk a little bit about the kinds of feedback that you receive through the military housing offices and the input that residents make on the different kinds of point of service surveys and things like that.
Certainly. So you had mentioned ICE, and if you're on a military installation, you can submit specifically related to the military housing office. So we do get that feedback to make sure that our housing offices are providing, the services that we expect them to provide from a headquarters perspective. But from a project perspective or privatized housing, we have several measures. As Pat mentioned, we have the annual resident satisfaction survey, which is a valuable tool. We use that to get a broad overview of general satisfaction, because it's a snapshot once a year, but we can then take that information and really, we don't use that information so much to determine if you're satisfied or not satisfied with a particular area. We use that to make decisions on what is important to our residents. So when the landlords or the project companies decide to allocate resources, within that project, where should we allocate those resources? We want to allocate them to areas that are of importance to the residents that live there. So if it's more dog parks or more playgrounds or a swimming pool or, other types of amenities, or if it's street lighting, or if it's a security issue, whatever those things are, we can then, as we go through the budget process with the privatized companies, we can make sure we are allocating that. But then we also, the project companies use what we call a point of service survey. So when you have an interaction with a maintenance tech for a work order, they're asked to fill out a survey. We now have that electronic and online, so you can go online and you can fill out that survey. And they use various methods. Most of them use what's called Satisfax. We have access to that, so we can see the response rates. We know what the work order volume is because we have access to that. So we know what they're doing for work orders, and then we see what the response rate is. So we know if we're getting 10% or 20%, and we can encourage the project companies to try to increase that. If they're only getting 1 or 2%. That may not give us valuable information. We clearly want a higher response rate. So I would also encourage, residents that have maintenance work orders or have an interaction, both positive and negative, please fill out those point of service surveys, because that provides valuable information to the project companies, obviously, but then we also look at that information as well, and then we can utilize that in the fees that factors into the fees that they're given, but also in areas that we may want to focus or additional oversight or things we may want to change, processes we want to change. So using that, those survey mechanisms are very important to us, and we always try to encourage to the maximum extent possible participation in those surveys.
Brad, so I just moved from 29 Palms, California. I lived aboard the installation. Lincoln Military Housing was our company. I couldn't say enough good things about my experience. It was wonderful. Their repairs were always very quick. However, my husband was a battalion commander. So I wonder, are those, and I filled out every survey that I ever got because I always wanted to compliment these guys that would come and not only would they do what I needed, but then they would say, what else can I do for you while I'm here? And they would do everything. But are those results stratified by housing area, which would kind of segregate it by rank? Just curious to know if the feedback is different based on rank.
Yes, no, we do it by installation, we do it by housing area. Obviously, then that stratifies it by the demographics of whatever that housing area is. Yeah, because we look at that. Although I will tell you on the annual satisfaction survey across the board, all the services, the top one or two or of the top five got the highest ratings. It all had to do with maintenance satisfaction. So I think the individual maintenance folks that you interact with or with residents interact with are really doing a really good job. And we see that. I think the issue is a larger, maybe a resourcing issue or a manning issue, or and those are the things we need to look at, because we see that the folks that are actually providing the service, this is an annual broad survey, but by and large they get the highest ratings for the maintenance. So that is a positive thing. Then we just need to look at where are we having the issues and where are we having the concerns, and try to drill down and see if there's specific areas that we need to put more focus on.
Got it. Okay, before we lose Michael entirely. Sorry, say that last line again, Brad. I missed it.
No, I just said thank you so much for filling out your survey. We really appreciate it.
Yes, definitely. Fill out those surveys. Michael, I want to direct a question to you because I think Brad mentioned this earlier, is that not a large percentage of the military families actually live on base, whether by choice or by lack of housing. So I mentioned the Service Member Civil Rights or Civil Relief Act, excuse me, and I would like to hear just from your perspective, any issues that you've dealt with where that has been a benefit or a protection to families that maybe our audience members should be aware of.
Sure. So in terms of protecting tenants who live off base, there's federal law, principally the SCRA. There's the state law concerning landlord-tenant relationships. And then there is a number of various agencies that you go to complain about something when things don't go well. So we'll start out with the SCRA. With respect to housing, it has essentially two general protections. The first has to do with civil procedure. Whether you're being sued for not paying your rent, not paying damages, or for any other reason, the SCRA essentially says you're not going to lose the case because you can't show up because of your military duties. And if the court somehow enters a default judgment in violation of the SCRA, then you can reopen the case later on. Kind of a summary, but essentially that's civil procedure protections regarding the SCRA. There are specific protections that have to do with lease termination. Of course, if you don't like where you are, one of the biggest protections is, can I get out of here? And we are not, and there has been a great deal of action statutorily concerning the SCRA. We are now up to 6 different bases for terminating a residential lease. That would be the initial SCRA, back when it was called the Soldiers and Sailors Civil Relief Act. That is, you are a civilian, you sign a lease, and then you join the armed forces. You can terminate the lease. Then you if you get deployment orders on active duty, you can terminate a lease. Same PCS orders. And more recently, there have been the following categories in which you can terminate a lease. For example, if there's a catastrophic illness or injury, the service member dies, or just last August, if you sign a lease anticipating that you are going to be assigned there, and then the secretary issues stop movement orders, and you can't go there, and you've already signed the lease, then there's protections there as well. The Department of Justice, U.S. Department of Justice, has a website for people to complain about various issues, including the SCRA, and I must say that they have been pretty active in enforcing it and taking enforcement actions against various property managers, both on and off base. We have had issues. The very first issues had to do with just not following the SCRA at all, keeping security deposits for people that terminated their lease. And then there were issues relating to permanent change of station. What is a permanent change of station order? That's one that authorizes you to terminate a lease. Well, the PCS order is an obvious one. You're assigned to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and you get orders to Camp Pendleton, California. But it also includes several other things, most notably retirement and separation from the armed forces. We had some cases in which landlords would say, well, we're going to give you this upfront lease concession. You don't have to pay the first month, or the first 2 months are free. But if you terminate the lease for any reason whatsoever, including an SCRA protected reason, well, we're just going to claw it back from you. And the DOJ took several actions saying, no, that was an illegal penalty, penalizing people for exercising their SCRA rights. I would know that I've been in this business for a while, and I would certainly encourage people to go to their legal assistance attorney so they get it right. There has to be a notice. It has to say certain things. There has to be a copy of the orders which give rise to the reason for lease termination, or you get a letter from the commanding officer confirming that you have those orders and saying the right things, and we can help produce them.
Great. So you recommend the legal assistance office versus the housing office, or do you think both would be beneficial in this case? In those cases?
I would think that if we're talking about a termination of a lease based on the implementation of the SCRA, there is no better place to go than to the Military Legal Assistance Office. Right. I'm one old guy. I have a lot of experience in this stuff, but frankly, even the youngest lieutenant has had some training with these issues, and he's probably going to be supervised by somebody like me anyway. So I think, yes, when it comes to SCRA, the Legal Assistance Office is the place to go.
Okay,
I'd
great.
also mention, that a lot of the protections are embodied in state law. State law will say there's a warranty of habitability, that the landlord has to comply with the building codes, that the landlord has various responsibilities, and the statutes typically just list them. But what happens if they don't do those things? There's the courts, of course, but those are very inconvenient, especially if you're about ready to move somewhere. You might consider making complaints to the Armed Forces Disciplinary Control Board. That's the group that can put a place or can recommend off-limits designation if it's not a one-off, but it's a pattern of practice. The housing inspector of that municipality may have the authority to motivate the property manager to fix things. And there may be a professional organization. For example, in North Carolina, the North Carolina Realtors, North Carolina NCREC, Real Estate Commission regulates not only people that sell land, but property managers as well. And they can be very useful in getting landlords and property managers to make repairs when they're not inclined to do so very quickly.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that good detailed information. And if anyone has questions, you can type them in the chat box. So a lot of feedback. I don't know what's happening. Okay. Sorry. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay,
I haven't heard any question, though.
So here's my question, and it's for all of you. If a family encounters delays now with this tenant bill of rights, there's a lot of ways to go about fixing it. But at what point do you involve the chain of command? And I say this having just read the House Armed Services Personnel Subcommittee, Mark, recommending policy that would include in performance evaluations the oversight of housing, installation housing. So Ms. Corey, I'd love to start with you on that.
Well, I would say in general, so military members, if they're living in privatized housing or government housing, please try to go through informal dispute resolution first. So if it's privatized housing, you want to try to go to your landlord, the property management office, and seek resolution. But then you do have housing advocates now at the installations, and that government housing office, military housing office, they're there to assist you. The same for the people who do live off base. I did want to quickly say, just so everyone's clear, DOD's longstanding policy has been to rely on off-base housing first. So that's why 70 to 80% of military families live off base. That is consistent with DOD policy. We generally do housing assessments, market assessments, and provide on-base housing to fill the gap. So if there's not enough available rental housing at certain price points, then that's what you see being provided on our installations. But back to, what do they do? They need to try to go through that informal resolution process when they have a dispute, and then elevate it or seek assistance from their housing office. That advocate and that housing office will help them. If they don't know what to do, go ask, and they'll provide assistance to them. In terms of, how should that be included in an installation commander or somebody else's performance rating? We have confidence that that's already being appropriately included in individuals' ratings when they have certain responsibilities. But right now, I would say the Department of Defense doesn't advocate for a mandatory how it should be addressed in any individual's performance rating or their performance standards, military or civilian. It will be addressed. It will be considered as part of that individual's review. But that chain of command needs that flexibility to decide how to put it in there and how to weight that. But we do want to hold our staff, ourselves, our leadership accountable, and also we're taking measures to try to make sure our privatized housing project company partners are also being held accountable. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any thoughts on the matter?
If I could, when you're looking at the chain of command here in Washington and the Secretary of Defense, the chain of command looks a lot different for the Lance Corporal at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. His chain of command looks like the gunny, the OIC, maybe the lieutenant, if he has the nerve to go to that person. The chain of command doesn't have a lot of control over the housing, but they can. But it seems to me that it's better to inform folks of what your difficulties you have than not to inform them. They can provide referral, and they can have folks that will be there to assist you as an advocate, and they can also serve as a neutral third party when it comes to move in and moving out inspections. And finally, I'd like to really congratulate the folks on the dispute resolution. If you go through the informal resolution and it doesn't work, and then there's a bit of a hammer behind that, some teeth to the formal resolution where the decision-making authority has some real ability to make things happen. Inspections and distribution of the withheld funds and directing people to make repairs by a certain date. Good on you. I appreciate that. And frankly, that will make the informal dispute resolution more effective because people will know that they could go to that one if it doesn't work.
Got it.
Yeah, and Jen, if I can jump in here, yes, thank you. So one of the things that we see as an issue here is inconsistency. So we're not necessarily seeing an apples to apples experience for military families across installations and different commands, things like that. So I do think that, personally, that having this included as part of performance review for installation commanders, it would give some level of accountability that would allow for some consistency across the board. Because what's happened is families don't necessarily know who to go to for what. And so part of the process here that's been established is phenomenal. And part of that includes going to chain of command. And so I think that we have to empower people to speak up. And part of what was a good thing around all the housing, things that came to light back in 2019 is it opened the lines of communication. We were seeing for a long time that families were dealing with poor housing conditions because of this, the culture of resilience, or it's not that bad, or that's just what you get. Again, that's not every installation, that's not every housing company, but I think that the more we can talk about this, the more it will encourage those positive help-seeking behaviors so that families can have a healthy, safe place to live if they are experiencing those difficulties.
Great perspective.
I'd just like to add, so by no means am I saying the installation commander shouldn't be held responsible for providing the oversight they should. I guess I'm politely saying that we don't necessarily need Congress to try to tell us how to do that. So that is already happening, and it will happen at all levels within command, depending on those individuals' responsibilities, and we have confidence that it will be done appropriately. Thanks.
Fantastic. Brad, I hope you're still there. I can't see you right now, but I got a question specifically for you. In one of the many military spouse Facebook groups I'm in, a story was circulating about a Navy family aboard housing in San Diego that had an issue with her washing machine, and they were gone for 5 hours, and it basically flooded the house. They were given a $14,000 plus bill for that and thought they were fully covered because they had renter's insurance. Turns out they were not. Ultimately, the insurance company did pay for it, but through all of the discussion that came out, I found out that Lincoln Military Housing, which I believe was the company, had a $50,000 deductible, which to me seems insane. If you're a property owner or manager, that seems very high to me. So can you explain why it's so high? And then Michael, on the tail end of that, if you could talk maybe a little bit about some maybe specific questions that military families should be asking when it comes to their insurance policies. I was speaking with Pat about this earlier today, and it is vital if you are living in a home that is yours, you need to have homeowners. But if you're living anywhere else, a dorm, a house on installation off, you need an apartment, you need a renter's insurance policy. So sorry, that was long-winded. Brad, I'll leave it to you and then follow up with Michael.
Okay, sure. Thanks. I'm very familiar with that particular issue, and there have been others very similar to that have not gotten the publicity, but have left the service members in the same precarious position. First, let me talk specifically about the $50,000. That is not insurance to protect or to cover the tenant. That is insurance that protects the project company. So, if you have 1,000 homes and you have a storm, a hurricane or tornado, and it damages your homes, those homes, because they're no longer government, they are privately owned, as we all do, they're covered by insurance. that insurance that the project company owns to protect their assets has a $50,000 deductible, and it may seem that $50,000, that's, hugely excessive when, my car insurance is $500. And if I go to 1,000, I think, I don't know if I could, have that out of pocket. But for a project company, if you go something less than 50,000, they're going to be paying a significant higher amount in premiums to get that covered. And so from a project damage and risk assessment standpoint, $50,000 to cover the project asset for the project company is appropriate.
Okay, that's definitely not circulating. That's good information. Thank you very much.
Right, that's right, because I've read some of those articles in it, and it seems like that's to cover the service member. And then, the reason that you have the issue is that the service member then, if they are responsible for damages, they start a fire, not intentionally, they have a candle. We've had situations where there's been a candle in a bathroom and a wind blew a curtain and started the house on fire, or a kitchen fire, or in this case, a malfunctioning valve on a washing machine, and it damages the home. The resident is responsible for the damage to that home, in addition to, all the damaged personal property. So that's why we encourage them to have renter's insurance. This particular issue, and I take issue with USAA, which, markets itself as an insurance company for military members. I've heard conflicting information, so I don't want to speak out of a level of expertise because I'm not particularly certain of the issue. However, they did not have USAA claimed they did not have the appropriate liability insurance. So they covered their couch and their, personal belongings, their table, anything that got damaged by that flood. But the damage to the home, which, they're responsible for damaging. So, if they were to put a hole in the wall or, you're responsible for those damages. USAA made the decision that they did not cover, that their insurance, their liability insurance that they had, did not cover that damage or did not cover that home because of where that home was. I don't know the particulars. All I know is USA said we don't cover that. Now, ultimately, as you said, it got paid. There were some phone calls that were made that I'm aware of that then the USAA CEO made a decision that they were going to pay that claim. We have taken it upon ourselves to try to increase the education to our sailors and Marines. We have what we call as a plain language brief. So every incoming family coming into housing get a plain language brief, which was required by the NDAA. But it includes all of the Tenant Bill of Rights and all of these other things. But we use that as a vehicle to provide additional information. And renter's insurance is one of those things that we have now added additional information from what we were giving before to make sure they are aware the renter's insurance needs to cover liability insurance. And we are suggesting that when they talk to their insurance company, they make sure that the liability and coverage covers where they actually live, so that they need to let them know they live in privatized housing. Does this liability insurance cover me at this address in privatized housing? And then, determine what the appropriate amounts are for their particular situation. But it is a big issue. We're finding more and more service members are at risk because they don't have the appropriate coverages in case they have some type of a fire or damage to the home.
Got it. So, Michael, I think Brad stole your thunder with that one because he pretty much told everyone what they should call their insurance company and ask. Which that's not. I just want to make sure that's not legal advice. So I would certainly defer to the attorney on the call to provide the appropriate advice.
Well, it's good advice. Well, it's good advice though to get renters insurance. One reason that people in military housing don't get renter's insurance is that they think that the Personal Claims Act will cover them for any damage to their property. So if a hurricane comes down the road and all the power gets cut off and all the meat in the fridge spoils, there'll typically be a claim against the United States for damage incident to military service. But the fact is that that claim is only discretionary with the United States. They don't pay if the damage was a result of the tenant's negligence. There's this reasonable use threshold that you have to get over, and they only pay depreciated value, and they take a while. So for all of those reasons, even you should nonetheless get the renter's insurance, and particularly the liability for the damage to the residence itself.
Got it. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're coming up on our last 5 minutes. And he mentioned hurricanes, so it kind of jogged my memory to back in February when there were those terrible storms down Texas, Louisiana area, and houses were having, and speaking of Texas and Louisiana, if you would just put in your geographic region, that's the one I told you were going to post first, and I was mistaken, but here it is. There were plenty of homes where pipes burst, and obviously those were circumstances that no one expected. All of Texas was shut down for a long time. But now that we know that happened, and it could happen again, what is the housing office doing to strengthen the resiliency of the installation community to make sure that these don't happen this coming winter?
So I'll just say in general, the privatized housing landlords certainly have stepped back and tried to assess locations where there may be needs for additional installation of pipes and things of that manner. So there's awareness, and that was a rather extreme situation in a part of the country that doesn't normally get that kind of weather. But of course, we're all aware of climate change and have to be sensitive to whether or not that could be something that will be experienced more frequently. So that's something that's being discussed. I don't think it's something that we've gone about mandating, like something specific happening. Brad, do you have anything you'd want to add on that?
No, I would just echo what you had said is, as we continue to replace some of the older homes and build new, we want to make sure that we are using the latest technologies, not only as it relates to temperature variations, but earthquake requirements, flood requirements, all those things, because we do know that weather is becoming more and more severe, and the costs of these weather events are ever increasing. So as we work with our project companies, in building new homes, we want to make sure that we are incorporating all of these new requirements to make sure that we are making the new homes more resilient. The challenge is going in and retrofitting some of the older homes that we still have in our inventory. And unfortunately, I think in some cases we just need to be aware of what the impacts can be and take action to make sure we are reducing that risk as much as possible. Like shutting off the water to the outside faucets and doing that type of preventative maintenance, so that if we're expecting a super cold weather event, that we can hopefully prevent that. But understanding that there is still risk while we still have the older homes in the inventory.
And Jen, if I may real quickly, I think that's just a comment to make to everybody, whatever your situation, whether you're living in homes that you own, house you own, or you're renting, when you talk about insurance coverage, you need to think about, does that coverage include sewer backup? Does it include flood protection if you're in a flood zone? Does it include hurricane protection? I mean, those are things for you to talk to your insurance advisor on and make decisions on based on your own financial situation. But again, you could talk to the housing office or talk to legal counsel if you have questions about really specific things that might be included in a policy.
That is excellent advice. So we're about to close out. Does anyone have any final thoughts they'd like to share? Shannon, I'll start with you.
No, I mean, I think we had a great conversation. I do want to congratulate everyone again for the great work that's happened. And I know that people are really committed to getting this right. And that's amazing. And so just grateful to be part of this. And thanks for having me.
Great. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks to MOAA to bring the folks together. Appreciate the efforts at the top about the new rights in the NDAA. I think it'll be a challenge going ahead. Putting something down on paper is not the same thing as actually having it work, but I think it's a terrific start, and I'm optimistic.
That's good news. Okay, Brad, over to you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this panel forum. I think it is always helpful to be able to, provide information of where we're at and what we're doing, and making sure that, the service members have a broad understanding of what we're doing. But more importantly, it's good for us to get feedback. As I said earlier, we have implemented these rights. I don't expect it to be smooth at every location right off the bat. And we are looking for feedback so that we can make those adjustments, because we really do. I've been in the housing business for, more years than I want to say. And I take this very personally. Our service members, they deserve quality housing. So the things that we need to do or change to make sure we are continuing to focus on that, we need to be aware of that. And sometimes we don't always get that information. So I appreciate these forums and appreciate getting the feedback so we can make those corrections. Thank you.
Great. So foot stomp, take the survey. Brad wants your feedback. Okay. And finally, Pat, if you would close it out with your comments.
Sure. Well, first, I want to thank MOAA and MFAN for all your work advocating on behalf of military families, military members and their families, to have quality housing and all the things that you do to support them. We appreciate the chance to work with you, and forums like this are very valuable, as Brad said. I also just wanted to quickly make sure that everybody realizes that the Tenant Bill of Rights is just one of the many reforms that the Department of Defense is implementing to try to improve the military housing privatization initiative, all the privatized housing, and your experience living in that housing. We really do care. We have not only expanded training, but the military departments have hired more than 600 additional staff working in the housing offices. We've increased transparency and access to work order data. We've just worked on improving incentive fee metrics and done a number of things that we feel has really made a difference so far, but we continue those efforts. We still have more work to do. We're very focused right now on inspection standards and different things that will help us better address conditions in the housing and ensure that you guys have a good experience and want to live in privatized housing. And we just really appreciate that you all, as Brad said, take that time, fill out surveys, speak to your housing advocates, speak to the housing offices. They do share that information, and we are committed to trying to provide you a good housing experience and are there to support you. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak at this today.
Thank you, Pat. I want to echo Shannon's comments. Congrats. A lot of good work has been done. I appreciate so much that you all shared your time and expertise with us. Again, we're going to be making this recording free and available to all military families. So if you're attending now, I urge you to share it with your own networks. And then I have to, on the note of survey, remind everyone that the active duty spouses survey went live today. So if you are an active duty spouse, if you didn't get invited, you now even have an opportunity to share your feedback. So hop on DOD website and you'll find the link, or go over to MOAA Spouse Facebook page and you'll find a link there. So again, thank you all, and I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you.